Okay, our speaker this morning is Zach Wahls. He was first elected to the Iowa Senate in 2018. He was elected to his second term in 2022, representing Senate District 43, which includes Coralville, North Liberty, Solon, and part of Western Iowa City, and rural Northeast Johnson County. Senator Wahls has served as the Iowa Senate Democratic leader since November 2020. Zach ran for the Iowa Senate to give all Iowans a voice. Growing up in a non-traditional family, he learned early that what it was like to be left out, and he remembers how hard families like his had to fight to get a seat at the table. Prior to his election, Zach worked primarily as an advocate in the LGBTQ civil rights movement following his 2011 testimony before the Iowa House Judiciary Committee in Defense of Marriage Equality and his two-mom family. In this capacity, he wrote extensively about his family's experience, including a best-selling book, and has spoken to hundreds of audiences, including a primetime speech at the 2012 Democratic National Convention. As an Eagle Scout, Zach co-founded and led Scouts for Equality, which successfully executed a national campaign to end discrimination against LGBTQ people in the Boy Scouts of America. Outside of legislature, Zach serves as Vice President of Community Investment and Development at Green State Credit Union, Iowa's largest financial cooperative. He also owns and operates a small business with his sister selling custom-made playing cards. And he is co-owner of his family tree farm in Northeast Iowa. So he's very busy. And those playing cards are interesting. I just saw those this morning. Famous people on them, so it makes playing cards fun. Zach completed his master's in public affairs from Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs in 2018, and his bachelor's from University of Iowa in 2014. He is married to his wife, Dr. Chloe Angel, in 2021, and they live with their dog, Zelda, in Coralville. I also want to add that Zach wasn't awarded an FFBC scholarship in 2011. So great things are to come for all of our. I don't know if you want to become a senator or not, but you have aspirations. Please join me in welcoming Zach Wahls.
Can everybody hear me okay in the back? We're good on the Zoom machine. We're good. All right, very good. Well, Byron, thank you so much for that very warm introduction. And First Friday Breakfast Club, it is good to be back with you for, I believe, the third time joining you for breakfast here on a Friday morning. I want to say, first of all, congratulations to all 14 of the scholarship recipients. No pressure about running for office. I mean, seriously, you've all got so much to focus on ahead of you in terms of college and self-discovery and finding and starting your own path. But congratulations to all of you, and thank you to every single person in this room who contributed to make those scholarships possible. Let's give all of those donors another round of applause. I'm going to speak this morning for just a little bit. Several of you have heard me already give some biography, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But obviously, we had a very difficult legislative session, and so I want to address some of the challenges that we saw under the Golden Dome this year, and then I want to leave plenty of time for some conversation and discussion or questions and answer. But the thing that to me strikes me that's most important about this moment is how important it is for us to have this community and this space to come together. Byron mentioned, obviously, today is June 2nd, the second day of Pride Month. And I think it's just so important, especially in moments like this, where it does feel like we are a community that is under attack, that we're facing a backslide, for us to be able to come together, have space, and during this month to celebrate Pride and let folks know we are not going back. You all know it, and I know it, and there's no use sugarcoating it. This was a particularly awful session of the legislature that did so much more harm than good, especially with all of the attacks aimed at Iowa's LGBTQ community. For years now, there has been a large majority of predominantly Republican legislators in the Iowa legislature, led by Governor Reynolds, who have made punching down on the LGBTQ community a top agenda item. Year after year, they've passed legislation that has discriminated against LGBTQ Iowans, attacks our communities, disrespects our inherent worth and dignity, marginalizes us, and this year denies young people and young adults healthcare and tries to reverse years of hard-fought progress. And this year was maybe the worst one that we've seen so far. In all, anti-LGBT legislators introduced nearly 24 bills this year attacking LGBTQ families and communities, many of them specifically focused on children and young adults. And while many of those didn't pass, the bad ideas that they contained were often rolled into larger bills, which are now, unfortunately, law in our state. Republicans passed a ban on gender-affirming care for trans teenagers and young adults, a truly heartless measure that will only create more pain and suffering among young Iowans and prevent Iowa parents from parenting in the way that they see fit. They also passed a bathroom bill that will make bullying and harassment even worse in our schools. They passed Don't Say Gay laws so that students and teachers have to hide their true selves in the classroom, and the governor signed that into law just the other day. They passed a forced outing law that will put kids in danger and force educators to violate their professional ethics. They also passed a law banning teaching about HPV and HIV in health class because I guess they believe if young people don't know about sexually transmitted infections, they won't get them. And their anti-gay panic even extended to the school library with a book ban that will force teachers and librarians to remove works of classic literature, not just books about LGBT experiences, by the way, classic literature from the shelves. These laws are shameful, and we know that they are going to have real-world consequences. As I said on the Senate floor when we were debating some of these awful bills, young people are going to die because of the gender-affirming care ban. We know that kids are going to be bullied, and educators are going to be punished for doing their jobs. And for what? For the people who advance these bills, this is all just politics. They've decided that demagoguery and discrimination helps them with their base voters, and that's worth the human cost to their neighbors and constituents. In Iowa, fundamental rights, basic respect, tolerance, and human decency should be above politics. That's what we're fighting for. I know that's a lot of very bad news, and I wish I had better news to bring you this morning. But despite all the bad things that have happened this year, I do want to say thank you to everybody in this room who took time out of their day to speak up and to be an activist and be a part of the effort against these awful bills. Iowans stood up and spoke out against this legislation all over our state. We saw an incredible outpouring of opposition at every single part, every single phase of the legislative process. Senate Democrats were listening to the kids and parents who testified at the subcommittees against these bad bills. We read the comments submitted on the bills by people from across Iowa, and we marched outside the Capitol and chanted in the rotunda alongside the brave young people who had the courage to challenge these awful bills. Republicans, on the other hand, did their best to ignore the will of the people on these issues, but their ignorance and their divisive partisanship will only take them so far. We are going to continue to stand with our LGBTQ family, and we need all of you to continue standing with us. We have to turn back this tide of discrimination and marginalization, and we can only do that by working together. So I want to close before I take some questions by, again, just underscoring the importance of pride and what that means to have the courage to stand up, to speak out, to say that we aren't going to go back, and to understand that the only way that we make this better is through the political process. I know that politics often can feel icky or slimy or something that we don't want to participate in, but the reason that we are where we are today is because there have been forces that are opposed to our community and our families that have organized relentlessly, have built robust infrastructure across our state, and have campaigned against us. The only way that we're going to defeat them is by doing the same thing, rebuilding our community, re-strengthening our infrastructure, and fighting back as one. And that starts with the Pride Month that we are never going to forget. So thank you all so much for hosting me today, and I'm love to answer any questions that you might have. You can applaud for that. That's all right. Any questions? All right, let's go here, and then we'll go over to not Senator, Supervisor McCoy, right here.
it's been passed before, what ways can you and your constituents fight?
It's a great question. So we're here in Polk County, which is one of the counties that has already started the work of reinvigorating, I would say just at the precinct level, getting back to good old fashioned community organizing, neighbors talking with neighbors. We're going to have several very competitive elections here in the Metro in the 2024 election in the state legislature, both in the Senate and in the House. In the last several years, several of the seats that we've been able to flip have actually been here in suburban communities, places like Dallas County, where Sarah Trungariot defeated Jake Sinister Agenda Chapman, and in Ankeny, where we were able to flip 2 House seats in this last election cycle, and we're going to have to work very hard to protect those in 2024. So it all starts at the state legislative level because that's where these laws are being passed. We also have work to do contributing to our statewide effort. So I live in Johnson County over in the eastern seaboard of Iowa. And in the People's Republic, we still have a lot of work to do to continue to increase turnout and to make sure that every single person is voting. I've been really excited to see a renewed effort and renewed energy around young people in particular. We know that millennials and Generation Z are very progressive. We just need to make sure that they need to get out to the polls, get registered to vote, and actually cast their ballots. There was some really promising preliminary data from 2022 that showed that young people's participation in voting is starting to really increase substantially. And so we just need to continue that progress. I've been been supporting a group actually here in the Des Moines area of, we're calling it young-ish professionals. So those of us who are like under 40-ish and who want to be getting engaged with other young Democrats. The group is called On Your Left. We're starting just a monthly happy hour networking, and now starting to find school board and city council candidates who are on the ballot this November to make sure that we're able to support them throughout the metro area. The last point I'll just say on that school board and city council piece, we have seen groups like Moms for Liberty, Americans for Prosperity, all these other very right-wing groups get highly organized and very involved in these down ballot local government races. And so I would say that the work to start turning the page back actually starts this November when we have city council and school board races on the ballot, including a bunch of those right here in Polk County. Matt?
So 2 parts. The AG came out and said that part of what's happening is part of this national agenda. My question is, do we know who's driving that national agenda and funding it? And then secondly, is there any reasonable Republicans left that are uncomfortable with this horrible that librarians are really afraid they're going to tax? So what's the plan with the company?
So from the national perspective, I'll tell you this, there is a very well-funded group that goes back to a lot of what we've seen with people who fund the Federalist Society and this attempt to influence our courts. That same group of people who fund that organization have now been funding a variety of C3 and C4 organizations that are now kind of leading the charge in this space. And just to be clear, this is a multifaceted effort. When you saw the governor get involved with several of these primaries against members of her own party last year, a lot of that was funded by these same special interest groups that are based in Washington, D.C. And literally on the night earlier this year, when Iowa passed a private school voucher plan that's going to spend a huge amount of taxpayer money to fund these so-called scholarships, but vouchers to private schools, many of which are religious and discriminate openly against LGBTQ students, those special interest groups literally flew out to Washington, D.C. to give the governor and Republican senators high fives behind the Senate chamber. And I know that because I watched it happen at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. So they're very organized. They're very well funded. In terms of where the response is, I think part of the challenge, Matt, is that there were a lot of us, and I would say to some extent, even including myself, who after so many of the victories that we saw through the 2010s, probably got a little complacent. We thought that we had gotten to where we wanted to go, but the folks who are now pushing this legislation saw those losses that they experienced around marriage equality, acceptance in the Boy Scouts and others, and decided that they had to find a new issue, a new wedge issue, and go campaign relentlessly on that. And that is where a lot of these attacks, particularly on our transgender teens and young adults, have come from. So I think that's the kind of that piece of it. In terms of what's next, the thing that we're always pushing back very hard against are changes to Iowa's Civil Rights Act. You were there when we added gender identity and sexual orientation to Iowa's Civil Rights Code. Protecting that continues to be something that's absolutely paramount to us. And unfortunately, I think our greatest fear is that that's what's next on the chopping block. In terms of are there reasonable folks left? Part of the problem is the governor has literally led campaigns against those folks in her own party. There were, I think, 8 or 9 of those primary challenges last year. The governor prevailed in 6 or 7 of them, just kind of depending on how you do the math. And we need Republican allies. We just don't have very many in the legislature right now. Yep. Trudy?
What can you tell us about
So I was so I was elected in 2018, and I joined a Senate Democratic caucus that had, obviously been in the majority and as recently as 2016, and that, for several years at that point had been in the minority. The bad news is we've lost some great senators to retirements and to some tough campaign losses. The good news is, and I just mentioned one of our rising stars earlier, Senator Sarah Garrett was able to defeat not defeat, but scare away Charles Schneider, who had been the Senate president over in kind of Polk County, Western Polk County, over in Dallas County, and then defeat outright Jake Chapman in 2022. And we have a couple of other folks who have joined our caucus. We have the first out queer woman in the Iowa Senate, Senator Liz Bennett from Lynn County. And then over in the House, there's been a huge amount of turnover as well. And so even though you may not necessarily consider all of these to be household names, we have new faces, people like Isaiah Knox, who was recently elected to his first term here in the Iowa Senate, the first Black man to serve in the Iowa Senate in over 20 years. So we have a growing, I would say, growing bench. We got a lot of work to do, but that's also true to where these down ballot races, city council, school board are so important, because your city councilors and school board members of tomorrow can be your state representatives and senators of the year or two after that. So that's something that's really, really important. Thank you. Let's go here and then there. Go ahead. Look, I don't have enough positive things to say about Senator Garrett. If I could clone her, I think I'd be the majority leader in a couple of years. But unfortunately, the scientists are still working on that technology. They've been too busy with AI. And so, we've obviously got a lot of great folks on our team. Being able to be an effective advocate with your senator, your representative, super important. But I would also say, going back to the question earlier, it's so important that we're able to talk to our neighbors, our friends, our family, our coworkers. That's where so much of this is going to happen. Unfortunately, a lot of that advocacy, as important as it is, often falls on deaf ears unless you have the right person in office. And a lot of our work that's ahead of us has to be on getting the right people back in office. Byron, I also do want to keep an eye on the clock, so I think this will probably be our last question. It's a great observation. And it goes back to an observation that I've made several times, which is that when you want to describe the predominant emotion in the state house right now, I would say the most common, and this is not a good thing, the most common emotion that you experience in the state house today is fear. Predominantly from Republicans of their own governor, because they saw what happened to their colleagues who had courage to speak out against the more radical and extreme elements of that agenda. There's also a culture of fear within the business community, a fear of retribution, that if they exercise their First Amendment right to free speech and advocacy, that they will be punished by the state of Iowa under the leadership of our current governor for speaking out and having the courage to advocate for their employees and their families. Think about how awful that is. So look, there's no doubt that we're going to have to get to a point where that culture of fear is being addressed. People are, by the way, you can't have courage unless there's fear. It doesn't take courage to do something that you're not afraid to do, right? Fear is what comes before courage. And so it's going to take some time, and I'm not totally sure how exactly it's going to happen just yet. But I will tell you that it's not going to be just the business community. It's going to be people like those who are in this room. It's going to be people across the state who want to speak up but don't quite have the right words to say yet, finding that courage to speak up and then bringing along more allies as we go, because you're absolutely right. We can't do it alone, right? This community is not big enough for us to do it on our own. We need allies. We need supporters. They're hard to find right now, but I know that they're out there. And if we're able to do what we can do to galvanize more support, we're going to have more allies as we go along the way. So that's a nice note to end on. Happy Pride, everybody. Thank you all so much. And again, congratulations to the recipients of today's scholarships.
Thank you, Zach. It wasn't the best message, but the hopeful message is that good eventually wins over. Thinking back in history when things like this, similar things, banning books and marginalizing segments of a country, it's a disturbing history. Hitler dismantled democracy, and democracies are fragile. It takes people to stand up. It's already, as Zach said, it's already been shown. There's fear of retribution by our governor, DeSantis, and Disney. It happens, and it's unbelievable. The best thing we can do is stand up for those businesses and speak out.